Russia is considered among its pioneers. They sent the first man and woman in space, performed the first lunar flyby using Luna 1, or launched a space flight with more than one crew member through Voskhod 1. In particular, they had the RD-180 engine, which was better than any other rocket engine of its time in many ways. And in a marriage that would have been unimaginable at the height of the space race, this Russian engine was powering an American rocket. That's why Russia has always threatened the U.S. and the rocket industry for nearly 2 decades. However, everything completely ended when SpaceX and Elon Musk appeared. They soon knocked out Russia's best rocket engines. But how? Let's find out in this episode of SpaceX Fans. In 2014, Elon Musk was right to warn the U.S. about their relationship with Russia and the rocket industry. At the time, the Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin sent shockwaves through the space industry when he announced Russia would no longer supply rocket engines to the U.S. Buying Russian-made RD-180 engines was seen as a good idea in the aftermath of the Cold War, especially when relations between the U.S. and Russia had thawed, and developing domestic RD-180s would have been a significant investment from the U.S. government. The U.S. is licensed to produce a domestic version of the RD-180 if it chooses, but due to a lack of investment from government and industry, it's never done so. It's a decision that was coming back to haunt the U.S. space industry as it clambers to find alternative ways to power the Atlas V. An unpublished Pentagon study written by retired Air Force Major General Mitch Mitchell in May of 2014 said an eventual Atlas V grounding would delay as many as 31 missions and cost the U.S. nearly $5 billion. Besides, Brian Harvey, an author of several space books, shared, for the Americans not to take RD-180s anymore would probably be quite disruptive of their space program in the medium term. Everyone was worried and trying to hold on to Russia, except SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, who rattled the U.S. military space launch market, challenging the monopoly of the United Launch Alliance by suing the U.S. Air Force. Referencing the U.S. dependency on RD-180 and sanctions against Rogozin, SpaceX's court complaint said it's hard to imagine any way in which entrenching reliance on Russian rocket engines while funding the Russian military-industrial complex with the U.S. tax dollars serves national security interest, especially at a time when the administration has sanctioned individuals associated with the same military-industrial complex over the Ukraine annexation. This definitely became a helpful warning to the U.S. Finally, and on the basis of a lawsuit filed by SpaceX, a court order has temporarily suspended the conclusion of new contracts, but on the basis of old contracts, engine deliveries have continued. As a result, studies began for a next-generation rocket engine in the U.S. Elon Musk not only talked, but he also acted. And finally, SpaceX has succeeded with the Raptor engine, which is superior to the RD-180 in every aspect. In the current situation, when the U.S.-Russia relationship really reached a dead end, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that SpaceX is the government savior. To be fair, let's see, how does Elon Musk engine outclass Russia's best rocket engine? Raptor was first publicly discussed by SpaceX's Max Voskhod at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics Commercial Crew Cargo Symposium back in 2009. Until now, the latest version of SpaceX Raptor, called Raptor 2, was developed and manufactured for use in the development SpaceX Starship. Raptors used the so-called full-flow combustion cycle, which means that all oxygen drives the oxygen turbo pump and the fuel drives the methane turbo pump. Musk confirmed that the production has reached 7 engines per week. On the other hand, the Russian RD-180 is a completely different story. It's larger and much heavier than the Raptor and was manufactured in the early 90s. In a way, Raptors are like an attempt to build a better violin than Stradivarius did, using modern methods. SpaceX has access to better diagnostics and more sophisticated simulation techniques than Russia did. Both are technologically based on the previous generation designed for the Buran program. That's why the Raptor resembles the RD-180 in that it feeds the pre-burner exhaust into the combustion chamber, ensuring that almost all the fuel and oxidizer stored in the rocket's tanks are used to generate thrust. Honestly, the Raptor also relies on a tweak to Russia's approach. Both fuel-rich and oxidizer-rich flows power its turbopumps, theoretically resulting in maximal efficiency. Possibly the greatest technical advantage the Raptor has over the RD-180 is that they use methane as fuel rather than kerosene, as the RD-180 does. Kerosene can gunk up the works of an engine after repeated use. Methane has a higher specific impulse and burns cleaner. It's also much easier in principle to synthesize on Mars, which Musk aims to do. Finally, it's necessary to discuss the specs of the SpaceX Raptor and the RD-180. For context, on February 10, 2019, just days after SpaceX began testing the first full-scale Raptor prototype ever completed, the engine briefly reached a main combustion chamber pressure just shy of 269 bar. That narrowly beats records set by Russia's RD-270 and RD-180 engine. According to the latest announcement by Musk, as SpaceX continues to ramp up ground testing of the upgraded engine variant, Raptor 2 now operates routinely at 300 bar main chamber pressure. Raptor 2 produces a thrust of 230 tons by burning methane and LOX. The RD-180 generates 386 tons of sea-level thrust, but notably has 2 combustion chambers and 2 nozzles. It uses RP-1, kerosene, and liquid oxygen. In other words, the Russian engine can be seen as one engine with 2 combustion chambers, or as 2 engines that share 1 turbo pump. So let's imagine 2 Raptor 2 engines can fit in the size of one RD-180, definitely creating a much higher thrust. Next, the thrust-to-weight ratio at sea level for the RD-180 is around 80, while for the Raptor it's around 200, meaning it's 2.5 times better. Raptor 2 currently costs about $1 million, but Musk promises it will drop to around $250,000 when serial production begins and when 3D printing of parts begins to be used. Until recently, the RD-180 cost was $9 to $10 million. Well, cost is one thing, but another strong consideration for the cost of the engine is whether or not it's reusable. And here the RD-180 is not reusable, or at least has never been reused, which is different from the Raptor, which will be reused up to 50 flights. In short, SpaceX Raptor truly is an excellent engine. It will completely help the U.S.'s broomsticks to perform all the important tasks without any connection to Russia. Anyway, Rogozin should apologize for lying to himself and everyone when he said the Russian engine is still the world's best rocket engine. Well, that just about wraps it up for today's episode of SpaceX Fans. Notably, advertisers who desire to advertise exclusively on the channel can contact us via the email address below. Don't forget, share your ideas about today's episode right there in the comment section. And your support is the motivation for us to create more quality content. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.